His 18-year-old sister was tied up by soldiers and led away with other captives. That night, hiding at the forest's edge, the boy heard muffled female screams coming from the enemy camp and realized that his older sister had fallen victim to a special kind of horror, one he had never known before. At dawn, the girl was returned to the rest of the prisoners barely alive, with an empty stare and a torn dress. From that moment on, she had become a black slave for the pleasure of the foreigners. At the end of the 19th century, the sun was setting over a Congolese village in the heart of Africa. A small boy clung to his older sister, waiting for their father to return. Early that morning, he had gone deep into the jungle to collect rubber for the white colonizers. The required quota was unbearable, and today it seemed he had failed to gather enough sap from the wild rubber vines. Suddenly, evening silence was shattered by screams and gunshots. Soldiers of the Force Publique, the personal army of the Belgian King Leopold II, stormed into the village. The boy grabbed his sister's hand as armed men began driving the villagers together and setting fire to the thatched huts. Their quiet life turned into a bloody nightmare, one the world would long refuse to acknowledge. Historical background: Leopold II and the Congo Free State. There were thousands of such villages across the Congo River Basin, and the fate of each could be the same. In 1885, Belgian King Leopold II obtained a vast territory in Central Africa as his personal property, naming it the Congo Free State. Despite lofty declarations about civilizing Africa, the colony quickly became a forced labor camp on an unprecedented scale. Congo was rich in resources: ivory, rubber, minerals, and Leopold sought to exploit them relentlessly. He established a brutal system of compulsory labor designed to extract maximum profit while investing almost nothing back into the colony. During Leopold II's rule, 1885 to 1908, Congo endured one of the most horrific yet least-known genocides in history. Historians estimate that between 8 and 10 million Congolese died from forced labor, violent killings, starvation, and disease. In other words, nearly half of the population was destroyed or worked to death. These staggering figures place the Congolese tragedy among the greatest mass atrocities of the modern era, though far fewer people are aware of it than of the Holocaust or the transatlantic slave trade. Rubber terror, forced labor, and bloody reprisals. Leopold II imposed a ruthless economic regime later described by missionaries as rubber terror. The primary commodity was wild rubber, whose sap was increasingly used in Europe to manufacture bicycle and automobile tires. As global demand soared, Congolese villagers were forced to spend months living in tropical forests, collecting rubber. Each village was assigned a quota, a specific weight of rubber to deliver to Belgian agents. Meeting these quotas was nearly impossible, and punishment followed swiftly. Enforcement was carried out by the infamous Force Publique, a colonial gendarmerie composed of white officers and African mercenaries. Armed punitive units swept through settlements, hunting down those deemed guilty of failing to meet production targets. The morning after the raid, the boy from our story witnessed the full horror of Leopold's regime. The village had been reduced to ashes. Shattered clay pots lay scattered in the soot, and wounded survivors cried in pain. Near a destroyed hut, the boy noticed a woven basket filled to the brim with a horrifying cargo. Upon closer inspection, he froze. It was filled with human hands. soldiers of the Force Publique practiced this brutal innovation. They severed victims' right hands to prove that bullets had been used to kill people rather than wasted. Often, other body parts were hacked off for the slightest disobedience or failure to meet quotas. Some witnesses claimed the rubber trade was so drenched in blood that it became unbearable even to speak of it. The basket dripping blood onto the sand became a sinister symbol of Congo's catastrophe. To ensure obedience, colonizers employed other inhumane methods. Punitive squads took women and children hostage. If their relatives failed to deliver the required rubber, the captives were mutilated or executed. One Belgian officer boasted of personally torturing hundreds of villagers whose community failed to supply enough food for colonial troops, cynically calling it a humanitarian act, because neighboring villages quickly complied afterward. Any resistance was met with total annihilation. Villages were burned to the ground, and the bodies of rebels were displayed on gallows as warnings. Those who attempted to flee into the jungle were shot like game. Forced exploitation caused not only direct killings, but also a massive humanitarian collapse. While able-bodied men labored in the forests for months, their families were left without means of survival. Famine spread across large regions of Congo. There was no one left to farm or hunt. Exhausted laborers were highly vulnerable to disease. Epidemics of smallpox, sleeping sickness, and other illnesses ravaged the colony. Thousands died from overwork and lack of medical care. Missionaries reported that in some areas so many workers died that no one remained to bury the dead. Bodies lay among the trees, grim reminders of the fate awaiting everyone trapped in this system of slavery. Silenced crimes against women. To keep the repressive machine running, colonizers terrorized everyone, men, women, and children alike. One especially tragic chapter was the mass sexual abuse of Congolese women. Returning to our story, after the night raid, the boy never found his father or mother among the living. His sister, however, was bound and taken away with other captives. That night, hiding near the forest edge, he heard muffled female screams from the enemy camp and realized that his sister had fallen victim to a previously unseen horror. At dawn, she was returned barely alive, with vacant eyes and a torn dress, henceforth a black slave for the pleasure of the foreigners. Sexual violence was routine in the Congo Free State. Congolese women had no protection from colonial arbitrariness. Leopold's guards, local soldiers, and even some white officials abducted women they desired and kept them as personal slaves. Sexual torture was widespread, yet rarely spoken of. Historical records barely document the scale of these abuses, as colonizers deliberately concealed them to protect their reputation. Most surviving accounts focus on amputations and killings, overlooking the gender dimension of the genocide. This hidden legacy still echoes today. The modern Democratic Republic of Congo continues to suffer from extraordinarily high levels of sexual violence, widely seen as a colonial legacy, when such acts were used systematically as weapons of terror. Millions of women across generations have carried trauma rooted in Leopold II's era, even though the world long knew almost nothing of their suffering. Global silence and the legacy of tragedy. The atrocities committed under Leopold II raise a troubling question. How did the world allow this to happen? Why was the Congolese genocide not condemned as loudly as later crimes in Europe? The answer lies in the racism and geopolitics of the time. At the end of the 19th century, European empires divided Africa among themselves, and none wished to admit that their colonial methods were criminal. It was convenient to ignore Leopold's crimes rather than cast doubt on their own colonies. Moreover, the victims were Africans, voiceless on the global stage, without wealth or media influence. Leopold, by contrast, lavishly funded propaganda portraying himself as a philanthropist, bringing progress and Christianity to Africa. While Congolese villages smoldered, exhibitions in Brussels and Paris celebrated the successes of Leopold's mission. Only at the turn of the 20th century did the truth begin to emerge. Missionaries and journalists risked their lives to expose what they had seen. One of the first was African-American writer George Washington Williams, who visited Congo in 1890 and openly accused Leopold II of crimes against humanity. Later, British journalist E.D. Morel analyzed trade records and noticed a chilling imbalance. Congo exported vast quantities of rubber and ivory while importing only guns and ammunition. He launched an international campaign against Leopold's regime, joined by humanitarians across Europe and America. Photographic evidence played a crucial role. British missionary Alice Seeley Harris captured images in the early 1900s that became the first visual proof of genocide. The most famous photograph shows a man named Nsala sitting silently before the severed remains of his 5-year-old daughter. The image shocked Europe and forced many to confront the scale of the atrocity. Writer Joseph Conrad, who had traveled along the Congo River, published Heart of Darkness in 1902, drawing on real horrors he had witnessed. His depiction of piles of severed hands alluded directly to colonial crimes.
Under public pressure, governments were forced to act. In 1903, the British Parliament commissioned diplomat Roger Casement to investigate. His 1904 report confirmed mass killings, mutilations, and slave labor. Leopold initially denied everything and attempted to whitewash his rule with a paid commission, but the evidence was overwhelming. In 1908, under intense international pressure, he relinquished Congo to the Belgian state. His personal colony ceased to exist, though for Congolese people, relief came far too late.
After 1908, the regime softened somewhat. Official bans were placed on beatings and amputations, and workers received minimal wages. The territory became Belgian Congo, with laws ostensibly protecting native lives. In reality, exploitation continued. Rubber concessions and plantations operated much as before, now under Brussels' control. European and American companies continued extracting wealth, while the indigenous population remained oppressed until independence in 1960. Decades of terror and plunder left Congo devastated, its human and economic losses irreparable. Paradoxically, throughout much of the 20th century, the Congolese genocide remained forgotten. Colonial powers suppressed it, unwilling to acknowledge their crimes. Unlike the Holocaust or the Ukrainian Holodomor, Leopold's atrocities rarely appeared in textbooks or major films. In Belgium, Leopold II was remembered mainly as a great reformer who rebuilt Brussels. Grand monuments honored him as a civilizer of Africa, while no national memorial was erected for his millions of Congolese victims. Only in recent years has the world begun openly discussing the Congolese genocide. In 2020, amid global anti-racism protests, Belgium saw renewed debate over Leopold II's crimes. Activists toppled or defaced his statues with red paint symbolizing innocent blood. Authorities removed some monuments and began discussing official apologies to Congo. Media outlets started referring to the tragedy as a forgotten Holocaust of Central Africa. More than a century later, the truth about Belgian rule in Congo is finally coming to light. The story of the little boy and his sister, fictionalized here, reflects the reality faced by millions. This painful truth about colonialism must no longer remain buried in silence, for remembrance is the only safeguard against repeating such crimes in the future.